No one asked for a lottery number, which is good. Someday someone's going to be there. Um, Luangpor mentioned door to the deathless. What is it? What is to be cultivated to get to that door? Well, that comes from the Bahia Sutta. If you want to look it up, Bahia, and that's a very brief teaching that Lord Buddha gives to an ascetic called Bahia. And he said, Bahia, you should train thus. In seeing, there's just seeing. In hearing, just hearing. In perceiving, there's just perceiving. In cognizing, there's just cognizing. Just the direct knowing. So when I say listen to sound, in the hearing, there's just hearing. If I add to that, what am I supposed to be hearing? Should I be getting something? What does he mean? That's doubt. That's not hearing anymore. If I'm looking for some experience called the deathless that I'm not hearing anymore, I'm looking for some other kind of experience within the hearing. But hearing is very simple. So there's no tanha involved. Just hearing, just that. Now sustain that for 7 days. That's the difficulty. Well, part of the difficulty is just understanding that simple instruction, just hearing. Now, when I do that, my mind is silent. I mean, what's to say? It's just sound. But I'm not trying to get rid of thought. It's just sound. And doors to the deathless are open. Now, as soon as you introduce language like deathless, then that's a thing. As soon as you say a thing, then we want to find the thing, and we get caught up in time and attainment and me. That's the problem with language. So he says to Bahia, in seeing, there's just seeing. That you should train thus. Bahia, you should train thus. In seeing, there's just seeing. So, like, if I just look at the router, I don't have to call it a router. I'm looking there and just seeing. Silence. Just hearing. Silence. So it's that silence of knowing that is sustained through in seeing, there's just seeing. It's not an attainment, because an attainment would always be me trying to get something. It's more like a remembering. And this is where I would say Luangpor Sumedho's stress on trust in awareness, trust in knowing. But oftentimes our mind quickly goes into doubt. Am I doing it right? I mean, it doesn't seem anything's happening, because nothing is happening. So sustaining that in hearing, there's just hearing, would require what? Trust. Well, you have to be present, first of all. If your mind was worrying about tomorrow, then you couldn't do that. So that's the way I'd answer that question. It's extraordinarily simple, but it's extraordinarily difficult. Because of what? Because of our thinking mind, our doubting mind, our cultural ideas about getting something in meditation, and so on and so forth. Quite often a person who has no background in Buddhism picks that one up easy, because they don't have this idea of attainment. So that leads me to another question from the online folk. Dear Ajahn, I aspire to be a Sotapanna. Is this tanha? I practice meditation every day. Most of the time, I went into stillness and experienced samadhi. Then I did some contemplation. It's not possible for me to attain my goal if I don't practice full time. Am I right? Thanks again, Sadhu. Now, I would say to this person, what about anatta? What is that about? If the person's saying, I want to become something, what happened? What's their understanding of anatta? How, it's so basic. Anicca dukkha anatta. So this is called micchaditi. And this is a cultural problem that we have in Theravada Buddhism, where we culturally define this idea of sotapanna as being something very admirable and desirable. Then we have the cultural idea of the end of, or having good rebirths, not having bad rebirths. And most of us are sick and tired of birth. So anything that can get us out of this package, great. So there's almost a kind of nihilism there too, which goes, I'm being facetious, I realize. But, I would ask the person, well, what do you mean by anatta? Who is it that is going to become this thing called sotapanna? Well, I am. Well, wait a minute. So there, the problem is the misunderstanding of the whole teaching. The whole teaching is just like, it's kind of like so very, very micchaditi. So what do we replace? The whole idea of self becoming something, we replace it with causality, ida paccayata. With this, if there's this, there's that. If there's not this, there's not that. So rather than me becoming something as an ego, you could say, what are the causes and conditions for peace? What are the causes and conditions for the end of suffering? That's a different kind of a question. It's a different kind of statement. It's not about me getting something. It's more about me understanding. And it's rather like if you drive a car, I've heard, I don't drive a car, I've heard that there's a gas pedal, acceleration, and a brake. Chaimai, thus have I heard. And if you press the wrong one, it's going to be a disaster. That's wrong view, micchaditi. You have wrong understanding about how to drive a car. If you know what's right, you have samaditi. You have right understanding. So the first premise of Buddhism is you have to understand how to drive the car. You have to have samaditi. So this person, I would say, not to be offensive, but you're not driving the car correctly. So what? And it actually goes to another question. In some Buddhist literature, I have come across the idea of positive desire, the desire to do good, to help others, etc. How is this related to tanha? Is desire always tanha? I would like to hear your thoughts. So tanha, in my sense of the text, says tanha is always combined with micchaditi, wrong understanding. I want the car to stop, but I press the accelerator. It's a mess. So desire is natural. We wouldn't eat food if there were not desire. It's natural. There's nothing wrong with it. But if we misunderstand the nature of desire and we function from wrong understanding, then we'll suffer. And our ultimate desire is the end of suffering. Because whenever we suffer, we don't want to suffer. It's just human. We're just animals in the same way. So the Buddhist teaching is actually addressing desire and saying desire is fine. Just get it right. Do it right. And how do you do it right? Well, you look at the causes and conditions of suffering. Why do I suffer? Second noble truth. So when I feel suffering in whatever way, and I notice it in the stream of consciousness, I keep emphasizing this, that like the first noble truth says there is suffering. It doesn't say I am suffering. So there's an objective view on the feeling of suffering rather than the subjective. I am suffering would be, oh, I got these knees. What am I going to do about these knees? I got to get rid of them. I need new knees, blah, 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 blah. That's ego, that's attavada, and so on. There's still individuality. I still go to the doctor and so on. But the very feeling of pain is an objective experience in the stream of consciousness, isn't it? It arises, causally conditioned, so it's ida pachayata. It's not, I don't own it, it's part of the body. So with old age as condition, there and a life of using, these are 77-year-old knees, so they should hurt. This is their nature. So with aging as condition, there's pain in the knee. And that's when I start to look, when I actually use anatta. See, anatta is not saying that there's nothing. It's just it's a different way of referring to your individual experience. With this as condition, there is that. Without this as condition, there's not that. So without old age, there's not that, but I can't do that. It's the way it is. So then to the question of desire, whenever you suffer, desire is going to arise. So you want to make sure that you understand the right way to alleviate the desire. So let's say I feel lonely, and so I go to the bar and I drink whiskey. So that seems to put an end to my loneliness, except the next day I have a headache and I need more whiskey. So this is michatiti, right? So I have the desire to get out of the loneliness, but I do something stupid. And the stupidity creates more suffering. And that suffering is just idapachayata, with whiskey as condition, headache in the morning, and the evening loneliness. With loneliness in the evening, more whiskey, there's more headache, there's more loneliness. It's just idapachayata. You can say, I am an alcoholic, or I'm suffering, certainly in individuality, but we're trying to get out of the ego sense and see how this all works. So that is why we replace this self idea, because it is just an idea. So go back to sound. You listen to sound. Now, is there a person there? There is individuality, there is consciousness, there is sound. I can't see a person. I don't see a thing called Viradhammo. And that's what anatta is saying, is there's no essential Viradhammo. There's no thing called a Viradhammo. There is paticca samuppada or idapachayata, flow of consciousness, and there's the awareness of that. And the awareness is where we find liberation, not in the flow of conditions. So then in terms of suffering, what gets me caught up in the conditionality? So go back to our lonely alcoholic. So for some reason, this person feels lonely for whatever reason. Loneliness comes up, but after having done Alcoholics Anonymous or whatever, the person now sees loneliness as an object. Is no longer the subject who feels lonely and feels sorry for themselves and da-da-da-da. That, oh, loneliness feels like this. That's mindfulness. Now, if this poor fellow can be aware of loneliness as Bahia is aware of sound, in the perception of loneliness, there is just loneliness, then they're practicing non-attachment. But that's incredibly difficult to do because loneliness is so negative. Desire wants to get out of the loneliness. So I can't do this. I need another drink. So cessation of tanha here would be what? Third noble truth would be bearing witness to this horrible feeling of loneliness until it ceased, until it went away. It'd be very hard to do, especially if the person's addicted. But that's just natural. So the freedom from suffering is idapachayata. So for all of us who are not in such a horrible situation, we're trying to look at, so back to the person or the definition of sotapanna, I would say, what are the causes and conditions for the end of craving? That's a different kind of statement. And the primary thing about this idea of stream entry is Sakkaya Ditthi, which we call the first fetter. And Sakkaya Ditthi is when you take this whole business personally. So, example, let's say that a person is at a business meeting, and in the meeting, they get shamed. The boss says, you're foolish, you're incompetent, you don't know how to do anything. And the person has no choice and just has to sit with the insults. I'm sure it never happened to you, right? But and then the person goes home. Now they have the resultant karma of having been really, really hurt. And they're not an arahant. They're just your average human being. Now that hurt comes up as anger, as resentment, as sense of shame, blah, 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 blah. And it comes up as an emotion. Now that emotion, to actually see it as idapachayata, with shaming as condition, there is this horrible result. It's very hard to do, just to see it in its, like, in perceiving, there's just perceiving. So what happens is the desire mind picks it up with a sense of, I'm hopeless, or revenge, I'm going to kill that guy, or I'm going to get, and the whole sense of an ego gets born, and that's rebirth. So stream entry, in terms of seeing Dhamma, would first of all, don't believe the Sakkaya Ditthi. Don't believe the personality thinking. See it objectively. And that's the first step, the abandonment of Sakkaya Ditthi, personality view. But you can see how hard that is. That's how very, very hard to do. So what are the causes and conditions for not taking this whole experience of the five khandhas? Like, if you can just say that the changing nature of the five khandhas, if you like the Pali, I just say objects, or I just say foreground, whatever way your language. So it's the five khandhas changing in consciousness. So if this person were able then to bear witness to the result of the insults, their sense of ego would be shattered or whatever, but they just bear witness to it. They strengthen the whole sense of witnessing, and they weaken the attachment to the khandhas, the movement of the khandhas. Because they're strengthening the witnessing, they're opening the doors to the deathless, to that which is beyond change. But very hard to do. They get stuck into the insults, and then they start to think revengeful thoughts, hateful thoughts, and they might carry them through, and then they tell others, and they're reborn into a sense of self. So for this person, really ask the question, what do you mean by anatta? Where is it in your teaching where you have the idea that I am someone who wants to become something? That's not, and that's cultural. And that's the second factor in understanding what we mean by entry into Dhamma or stream entry is Silabbata Paramasa, belief in rites and rituals. Someone who is born in Borneo doesn't think like that, right? No one in Perth, I doubt, thinks like that. So is that absolute truth? Or is it a Theravada convention that people have taken on culturally and they believe that's who I am? So that's Silabbata Paramasa, because it's a misappropriation of what those ideas mean. But it's common. It's very, very common. I just want Sotapada. That's all I want this lifetime. Huh? Who are you? What do you mean? What do you mean by that? Where Idapachayata is just saying, what are the causes and conditions for suffering? What are the causes and conditions for the end of suffering? And if you take that that it's the attachment to the five khandhas and the experience of the five khandhas, and you witness that the desire not to have something or desire become, and you practice witnessing, then you're doing the Bahiya Sutta. In the knowing, there is just the knowing. In the feeling, there's just the feeling. And then you're creating correct causes to realize the deep liberation of the heart. The third of these fetters, this is a teaching around the 10 fetters, and the first three are the ways, one of the ways we define stream entry. And the beauty of these is that they're for reflection. You can really consider them rather than some abstruse idea of sotapanna, which you don't even know what the people are talking about, and you want to get there. It's like going to Mars. I want to go to Mars. But this is actually like you can see Sakaya Ditti operating, and you cannot engage with Sakaya Ditti, and that's Panya or Samaditi. You can see that you're culturally conditioned. That's very hard, actually. Cultural conditioning is very, very hard. But you can say, well, that's just the sankhara, that whole idea that I am someone who can become something. The third of the fetters is doubt. And doubt is the attachment to intellect. Doubt is the attachment to thinking. So many people just kind of have ideas like this. And then, is that right? Am I getting there? Am I still a sankhara? So the doubt arises, and rather than seeing doubt as an object, the thinking mind grasps it and then begins to think to try to find a conclusion. Now, that's what you have to do in the normal world of problem solving. You need to use doubt, obviously. If you didn't have doubt, you'd be really stupid. But so doubt has its uses. So the good doctor was looking at my one of my back teeth. So she had doubts about, okay, how best to fix this? And so she consulted someone else. And so we have a way of working with it. That's the usual functional way of using doubt. But here, what happens in Dhamma practice is the mind gets stuck in thought. And thought is still a sankhara. It's still a construct. So you're in the foreground of thinking. And you might have a really clever doubt. Really, really good. I mean, I only have good doubts, right? Because I'm clever. But then you're still in thinking. You're still in the sankhara. But when you know doubt as an arom, do you say arom, a ramana, a type of mindset, and you can just be with it, what happens is tanha arises in relation to doubt because you don't want to doubt, you want to know. Knowing in confidence is pleasant. Not knowing in doubt is unpleasant. But we're going beyond pleasant and unpleasant. We're going beyond Vedana. So if you take Bahiya Sutta, then in doubting, there's just not knowing. I'm not sure. Not sure. It feels this way. And then in confidence, confidence feels this way. And both are equal in terms of the witness, in terms of awareness. And this is really, really very important to see doubt as an object rather than be the subject who's always trying to solve problems in the spiritual life. Otherwise, you'll never get beyond thought, which isn't to say you cannot use right thought. So with samaditi, you have samasankappa, right thinking. Now, what's right thinking? Well, right thinking is knowing this is anicca dukkha anatta, that the feeling of doubt is anicca dukkha anatta. Wrong thinking is, can I really be a sotapanna? Do I really have to practice all the time? Like, should I just shave my head and become a monk? Should I do that? That's wrong thinking because it's ego thinking, sense of self. Right thinking would be, oh, doubt feels this way. My rule, my ne. My rule for those who are not in Thailand is rule is no, because we got a question. What is the Thai translation? What is the English translation? My ne is uncertain. My rule is don't know. You see what I mean? Like this, just to know the stream of consciousness as a changing series of experiences is to know anicca dukkha anatta. To take it personally is to lose that perspective of anatta. You take it personally, you become the person. Just to finish that, as an example of taking things personally, I was speaking with Venerable Amasiri this morning. He just had a pretty nasty procedure, medical procedure. So we're just checking up how he's doing. He says he's doing fine. I said, okay. Anyway, I was asking him about like self-disparagement, self-criticism, and certainly most of my fellow monks, most of them, it's true probably, many suffer from self-criticism and self-judgment. And I was saying, is it true for Indian culture? He says, oh yeah, oh yeah. And his take on it was that in Western culture, the sense of self-criticism and self-judgment, self-aversion comes from perfectionism, that we're not perfect enough. Where he sensed in India and maybe Asia in general, its sense of overly humble attitude that somehow I'm not good enough or I'm not up to the mark. Now I don't know if that fits, but in terms of going back to Sakkaya Ditthi and attachment to that, if I have a thought of I'm really that, like, let's say I give a Dhamma talk and then I walk away from, oh, that's horrible talk for your Dhamma. You're pathetic. 50 years and you still can't, you can't even get a sentence out. I mean, that's horrible. That's Sakkaya Ditthi. I mean, I don't think like that used to, but that would be Sakkaya Ditthi. But if I believed in it, then I really am pathetic, then that's attachment. But if I saw that very thinking is a sankhara, it is anicca dukkha anatta, it's not who I am, then that's non-attachment, right? And yet, this kind of feelings of self-disparagement can be seem very real. They can just go on, and then you are born as this kind of a being. And so the reference to the Bahia Sutta is self-disparagement feels this way. It's just as it is. It's a perception. It's anatta. It's not who I am. It is ida pacayata. It arises according to causes and conditions. If you don't get that right, you don't get anatta right, then you have miccha ditthi. And if you get miccha ditthi, then you get miccha sankappa, wrong thinking. And then you get wrong effort and the whole thing. So you have to get samadhi right. And it's not some kind of samadhi, you just have an explosion in your head and you're enlightened. That's not it. It's much more ordinary. So I would ask you, just as an exercise today, if self-disparagement comes up into your mind, do you believe it? If you believe it, that's miccha ditthi. What would believing be? Oh gosh, I'm not getting anywhere in my practice. I'm 4 days and my mind's a mess. I was just thinking so much. Why am I thinking so much? That's believing in Sakkaya Ditthi. The other right understanding is hopelessness feels this way. Feeling like a pathetic meditator feels like this. And because it's just an arana, it's just an aroma. It's not who you are. So we're constantly going back to witnessing the way things are. It's not rocket science, but it is tricky because of delusion, because of avijja. So within that context, I'll go back to my silly mantra. So when you feel self-disparagement, first of all, see that is an aroma. And then maybe put in this language, I love you, I've always loved you, I will always love you. Make that the attitude towards this and see what happens. So talking with Amarasiri, there was a very tragic family loss in Ottawa, and he's been counseling the family, and very tragic. But and the person shattered, the mother, and so Amarasya says, "Well, you just do this mantra to yourself. I love you. I've always loved you. I will always love you." And the circumstances are I don't want to explain them, horrific. And she's doing that, and it's effective because it's putting metta or kindness into her citta. So when you have thoughts of self-disparagement and you believe them because culturally, familial, that's how you were conditioned. That's just what happens to us. Expectations. And then you just try to don't go there. Huh? Sometimes it's forced, but when you can just go to that feeling of self-disparagement and say, I love you, I've always loved you, I will always love you, you're putting metta into the heart. Don't even figure out who loves who. Because I used, I just started to do this. I said, well, who loves who here? I don't care. Do I love you or does it matter? Just, I love you. I've always loved you. I've always loved you. And it's actually quite an interesting piece. It fits around the ideas of metta bhavana. So if you're thinking of like Sakaya Ditti, well, isn't that Sakaya Ditti? I love you. I've always loved. No, just do it. Don't get into the intellect. Just kind of do it. But do observe that particular sense of self-identity that we have, seems in all cultures, and see that that is an object. That's not who you are.